Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Evolutionary AI series. Today's video we are going to talk about genetic algorithms, and I'm going to give you a code walkthrough over the script that I have created for the simplified GridWorld environment we have been talking about in the last video. If you like the content, subscribe to the channel and give a video a thumbs up. Okay. So if you didn't watch the last video of the series, please do it because it will give you a lot of context about what we are going to talk about today. But we will talk about the simplified setting where we have a grid world, 4 columns, 3 rows, a simple cleaning robot that is able to move in this discrete world, and whose goal is to reach the top right corner of the grid world where there is a charging station. The robot has to avoid a flight of stairs. Falling down the stairs will lead to a negative reward of -1. And there is also an obstacle at the center of the grid world, so if the robot will try to pass through the obstacle, will simply bump back to the original cell. The transition model is stochastic, meaning that every time that the robot tries to perform an action, it will perform this action only in 80% of the cases. Here there is an example, so if the robot wants to go up, it will go up only 80% of the time. 10% of the time will move left, 10% of the time will move right, and the same applies to all the other actions. So with this specific grid work, this specific transition model, and the reward function that we are going to use, there is an associated optimal policy that is the best policy that we can obtain to move in this grid world. Here you see that the robot will always start on the bottom left corner. From this position, the robot will go up and then move right to reach the charging station. In the case where the stochastic transition model will shift the robot on the right, or maybe on the right again, and so on, the robot will continue to move left and go up. In this particular location, the robot will also move left and not up, because if he goes up, in 10% of the cases, he could fall down the stairs, and the robot here wants to avoid this scenario. So this is the optimal policy that ideally we want to find with our genetic algorithm approach. We've also been talking about chromosomes. So every solution, every policy is encoded as a chromosome in a genetic algorithm. In our particular case, we're going to use this literal representation where every action is encoded as a letter. So our chromosome will be a sequence of such letters. We will have one letter for every possible state in our grid world, and with the letter A representing the action up, the letter B the action right, letter C the action down, letter D the action left. Okay, so let's give a look to the code now. You will find the code in the description below, and the code is very essential. We just import NumPy, and then we are going to import the GridWorld class that is inside another separate script that I have created. And the GridWorld class will allow us to create the environment here. Then we define an array here that is the gene set. This is simply the 4 possible letters of our chromosome. These are the genes of our chromosomes that represent our 4 actions. Then we have a couple of dictionaries. We have a gene to action dictionary that is just taking as input the letter, it returns an integer, and this will be used in our GridWorld environment that takes only integers. It doesn't take as input letters. Then we have a gene to arrow. This is used to print on the terminal the policy. In particular, we're going to print the best policy for every generation. So we will use this dictionary to print nicely the best policy for that specific generation. Then we have a couple of helpers. The first one is return random population. That is simply going to give us a random population. We are going to use random choice over our gene set, and this will generate a matrix of size, population size, chromosome size. Then we have another helper called return best worst population. That is just a sorting function. It takes as input the population, the fitness array. It's going to sort the population by the fitness array using the scores in the fitness array. So we'll sort in particular from best to worst. and we return both the sorted population and fitness array with a new order. The other thing that we need to perform is selection. In previous videos, you have seen that we have two types of selections, one called truncated selection and one called roulette wheel selection. These two functions implement these two selection mechanisms. Truncated selection is pretty simple. We are just going to take the top k best individuals and associated fitness array given by the variable new size. In the roulette wheel selection, we are doing something a bit more sophisticated. We're going to use NumPy random choice with a set of weights that are estimated from the fitness array using a stable softmax. So we are basically normalizing the fitness array such that the values will sum up to 1. And we are going to use this value called probs to sample individuals from our population. So a larger probability means that that individual will be sampled with a higher chance. And this chance is proportionate to the fitness. So individuals with higher fitness will be sampled more often. And once we have sampled for a new size population, we are going to return both the population and the fitness array. Then we have to implement the two genetic operators, mutation and crossover. We have been talking about those operators in previous videos. For the mutation, we are going to select randomly one gene in our chromosome and we are going to change it. In this case, we are going to randomly assign another letter. We have 4 letters for the 4 actions. If a mutation is performed at a specific gene location, we are just going to switch that letter for another one. This is done efficiently here using NumPy. We are going to define a mask that is simply given by a random value between 0 and 1 and a mutation rate also between 0 and 1. So a mutation rate of, let's say, 0.1, it means that we are going to mutate genes with a probability of 10%. The mask here is defined as a Boolean, so we are going to randomly sample values and check if those values are less than our mutation rate, and if they are, it means that we are going to mutate that specific location. Sub here is defined over the population matrix, and therefore when we perform a random choice over the sub applying the mask, we are just doing an in-place change of the population matrix, and therefore we can change the modified population matrix here. Then we have the crossover operator. The crossover operator, we are going to do something quite simple. So we are iterating over the population. Here I didn't talk about the elite value, so we can do it now. Elite is defined here like a subset of the best individuals that is not going to be modified. So let's assume that elite is equal to 5. It means that the top 5 best candidates are not going to be modified. So you can see that we are using elite both in the mutation and the crossover. And what we are doing here is simply saying we don't want to touch these individuals. We are not going to touch them at all. We are just going to copy and paste these individuals in the next generation. This is a simple way to avoid losing solutions to our problem in case we have found them during the evolution. So let's go back to our crossover function here. So what we are doing, we are iterating from elite. So we are discarding the elite here. We are just iterating over the remaining individuals. And what we do, we define parent 1 and parent 2 that is given by simply random sampling an integer and choosing this individual in the population. Then what we do is to simply randomly select another integer that we call cut. This is the cutting point. We start from 1 instead of 0 because we want to avoid the trivial cut at 0. That is basically will correspond to copy an individual. We don't want to copy, we want to perform crossover. And then we are going to assign to a child a copy of the first parent. And then to the second portion of the child, we are going to attach the second portion of the parent number 2. So the child will result in half the code being equal to parent number 1, half the chromosome being equal to parent number 2. And this will represent a crossed population, that is the one that we are going to return from this function. Then there is a set of variables that we are going to use. Those are quite intuitive. We have the total generations that we can set to 100. We have total number of episodes that we are going to set to 200. The total number of episodes here is how many episodes the robot is going to move inside the GridWorld. An episode is defined as the robot reaching a terminal state, that could be the charging station or the flight of stairs, or exhausting all the total steps at disposal. So we will repeat this for 200 times, so the robot will move inside the environment 200 times, and we will sum up all the rewards accumulated in these 200 episodes. Then we define the word. Here I just put just a tiny portion of the code. We have defined the number of rows and columns of the GridWorld, but then we also have to assign the reward function, the transition model, place obstacles, and the terminal states. So this is done in the code, so you can check the full code for more context about this step. But what we obtain after we define the GridWorld is an environment. Now this is similar to OpenAI Gym, where you have an environment, an agent, and the agent can interact with the environment through actions. It will get a reward, it will reach a new state, and so on. So very, very similar. Then we define the genetic algorithm's hyperparameters. First of all, the total number of steps that the agent is allowed to perform inside an environment. In this case, I use a very simple heuristics that is given by the total number of rows, total number of columns times 2. So as we increase the size of the GridWorld, this heuristic should still work pretty well, but of course, larger the word and probably larger this multiplicative value should be. So another parameter that we need to define is population size. So here the population is set to 100. We will have 100 chromosomes for 100 individuals. The selected size is the number of individuals out of 100 that we want to select for reproduction. Here I have selected a generous 50, so we will select 50 individuals from the 100 that will be used to, for reproduction. Then we have the elite size. As I told you before, elite is a subset of the population, the top 5 individuals here, that is just copy and pasted in the next generation without any mutation. We have the mutation rate. In this case, 0.1 means 10%. So 10% of the times a gene could be changed. In this case, the letter corresponding to an action could be changed into another one in 10% of the cases. Then we have a series of booleans that in this case are used to define a variety of things, like the use of mutation, in this case set to true, the use of crossover, also set to true, the use of roulette wheel selection, we're going to use it, so set to true, but we are not going to use the truncated selection. So typically these two are mutually exclusive, so you can use truncated selection, you should not use roulette wheel, and vice versa. So I invite you to play with these parameters and run the simulation multiple times, and you will see how the best solutions and the fitness curves are going to change based on the parameters that you're choosing here. Then we're going to step into the main loop of the script. What we are doing here is pretty simple. We are going to iterate over the total number of generations, 100 in our case. At the beginning of every generation, we are going to reset the fitness array. We will want to estimate the new fitness for every individual in every generation. Then we are going to iterate over the chromosomes, meaning over each individual in the population. So we get the chromosome, and then we do other 2 loops, one over the episodes and one over the total steps. And here is where we are going to estimate the fitness. So we are assigning into the fitness array, we assign the reward. So we are summing the reward for every episode and every step. We're adding up the rewards accumulated by the individual. Of course, we have to decode an action that in our environment obtaining from the GridWorld should be an integer, so we are using this dictionary to decode the letter into an integer, and then the m.step will allow the robot to perform a single step into the environment, and this will return a observation that is the next state, a reward, and a done that is obtained when we reach a terminal state is set to true when we reach a terminal state. So we get the reward, we sum up the reward, we accumulate the reward for that episode and for that specific number of total steps. Then, always inside this main loop, we're also going to have a series of operations like selection. So we are going to select using the roulette wheel or truncated selection based on the two booleans that we have seen before. Then we have to sort the population using the fitness array. We are going to return a new population matrix where the individuals are sorted from the best down to worst. And then we have the two genetic operators. We have the crossover, and then we have the mutation. Both of them can be applied or not, depending on the boolean that you are going to set into the hyperparameters. Okay, now let's assume that we are running this code. At the end of the simulation, we are going to get a plot like this one. So what you will see here are two curves, a blue one and a red one. The blue curve is the average, the mean, over the entire population. Here we are talking about the fitness. So vertical axis is the fitness, horizontal axis is the number of generations. So the blue line represents the average fitness over the entire population, while the red curve represents the best fitness for that generation. So the best individual in that generation, the associated fitness of the performance of that individual. Now the interesting thing here is that, as you can see, there is much more oscillations here, larger variance for the blue curve, and a smaller variance for the red one. This is kind of expected because this is an average over the entire population and this is instead over the best individual. So the line is almost flat, meaning that there are very tiny variations over the best policy, and there is much more variation over the average solution. Now another interesting observation here is that the policy a good policy is obtained pretty rapidly. So as you can see, after a few generations, we already get a pretty high fitness, both for the best individual and for the average one. And then we have a sort of flattening of both curves, meaning that once we have found these suboptimal or optimal solutions, there is not much change in the landscape. See, of course, this can change quite dramatically if we increase the size of the GridWorld, and I invite you to do it. You can experiment with the code, increasing the size of the GridWorld, and you will see how these two curves are going to change. Also, changing the hyperparameters of the simulation will change these curves. So if you change the mutation rate, the size of the elite, and other hyperparameters, will have an impact on these two curves. Okay, but which type of policy in practice we obtain? So on the terminal, you will see the following information. You will see the fitness mean, the standard deviation, the maximum, the minimum, and then you will see a simplified representation of the best policy in a grid view. So this best policy obtained in generation 1, as you can see, is a bit different from the optimal policy. So the arrows in this representation are represented here with these symbols. So this symbol means that the suggestion of this policy is to move right, while the optimal policy says that we should move left, and so on. So as you can see, this policy is different from the optimal policy. For instance, here we are going down against the obstacle while we should go right. Or here we are also bumping into the wall while we should go left. And here we are stepping right into the flight of stairs. That is, of course, wrong. But what you can see is that already after 3 generations, the policy is already better, right? So we, at least on the top, we are moving straight into the charging station. We are not bumping into the obstacle. And so overall, it's improving, right? So let's see what's going to happen after 100 generations. So in this particular case, running the simulation with these particular hyperparameters, bring to a better policy, but this policy is still not the optimal one. It's suboptimal. And I will explain you why. So as you can see, we do pretty well on these cells. We do pretty well here, but the bottom right actions are wrong. So we should go left, left. Instead, we are going down and we're going up here. Going up is still relatively good here. It's suboptimal because, as I said, if you go up and then once you are here, you may still go down the flight of stairs. So it would be better to go left. And here, of course, this is wrong, not completely wrong. At least we are not stepping into the stairs, but we're bumping down into the wall. So why this is happening here is because remember that we are starting from the bottom left corner. The robot is always starting from that location. So randomly going to one of these two states is quite unlikely, right? So the fitness score does not capture very well the reward obtained in these two states, right? So the robot will mainly move around this area, right? So capturing into the fitness score these two specific cell locations is quite hard. And this is why it's very hard for this approach to find, you know, the best action for these two specific cells here. Of course, I invite you to play a little bit with the hyperparameters. There is also an exploring start variable into the GridWorld that allow you to randomly spawn the agent everywhere in the environment. So it will not start from the bottom left corner, but it will randomly start for any possible location that is not an obstacle or a terminal state. So you can play with these values a little bit, and you can see how the policy change. Okay, so you will find the code in the description below. Once again, thank you for watching, and I will see you to the next one.